again, it's Mike from Everyday Ups and Downs. Welcome to another of my video blogs about my 64 days with the MiniMed 640G. This is probably my last but one of these posts about my time with the 640G, and today I'm going to look at fine-tuning SmartGuard to deal with those tricky situations. There were one or two times when SmartGuard didn't behave exactly as I would have wanted it to, so I just worked out a few ways, some of my own ways to kind of get around that, adjusted some settings here and there, and so these are my suggestions about that, descriptions of times when SmartGuard struggled a little bit, and then just some of the things I've done to alter the setup to try and work around those.
So here's another one where SmartGuard seems to have got it bang on. There's a little SmartGuard action there. Look, let's just drill in and see what happened. It was after breakfast. There you are, there's breakfast, a little dip after breakfast. And then I've come up to about 6ish and then stayed level all the rest of the morning, rather than potentially dipping down there below 4. So good work. There's another one. I was keeping an eye on things after breakfast, and at 10 o'clock all was going okay, but SmartGuard had to kick in there at just after 11 to stop that little bit of a dip as the breakfast bolus was wearing off. And here we are, it's coming up to lunchtime, and rather than being slightly lower than I'd like to be, I'm bang on target. Fantastic. This morning, not quite so good. Had an alert when I woke up, the base of delivery had resumed. SmartGuard showing, the sensor showing 9.9, fairly flat for the last 3 hours. That's 3 hours, and there's 6 hours, and there's the SmartGuard there, finished about 3, and then I continued to rise after that for a good while until, well, 6 o'clock in the morning, and then I sort of levelled out. And there's a little correction just before bed, which SmartGuard did prevent a low overnight, but rather than bringing me to mid-range, brought me to rather too high, and there I stayed. So sometimes it just overshoots a little bit, which is a bit frustrating really, when some of the times it's so perfect.
Now those overshooting ones are tricky really. I think it might be partly to do with the 2.2 limit. If you remember the post on how SmartGuard works, the SmartGuard cuts off at the end once it knows you are 2.2 above your low limit and you're going to stay there for at least 30 minutes. And occasionally that just feels as a little bit too high for me. Sometimes if I spot a SmartGuard is working, and it seems to be doing fine, I might cancel it early. But of course there are times when cancelling it early means that you then dip back down again. So what I can do, if I'm slightly unsure, is I can cancel SmartGuard, which means there's now a 30-minute period where SmartGuard will not reactivate. So I sort of massage that by setting a temporary rate for those 30 minutes of either 0 if I'm really unsure, or maybe 50% or 70%, just to take the edge off the basal to continue that. And then if I'm still at a position after those 30 minutes where SmartGuard is still required, the pump will then know and take action, and SmartGuard fully will kick in again. So that was one thing I've been using in times when I'm stopping SmartGuard early, just to be on the safe side really, because the last thing you want to do is to cancel SmartGuard and then wish you hadn't by crashing down into a low. You'll get an alert with your low limit, so you will get told, but the beauty of SmartGuard is really when it works and it doesn't tell you anything. Like the first example, where it just perfectly sorts it out silently for you and kind of helps you out without you having to do anything about it. I guess what I'd really like is for that 2.2 limit to be something that I could control. Because it seems to me that sometimes the 2.2 is just too much. And if I could set and configure it so that I might make it 1.1 above was the limit that SmartGuard would cancel at. If I was regularly overshooting, it would just give me a little bit more flexibility. As it is, what I can do is I can change the level at which SmartGuard kicks in. I can drop that down, but then I do run the risk of more low-level hypoglycemia. So it's a bit of a Hobson's choice, really. If it's a regular thing, where it's happening at a particular time or a particular time of day, then of course I can configure SmartGuard to give me an alert when it's kicking in at those times, so I'm aware, and you don't pick up the pump sometime later and have the little red flashing, let me just show you, there's a little tiny, oh in fact, perfect timing. Can you see the little red flashing dot there? That means that SmartGuard has kicked in, and I didn't realise it was kicking in. In fact, what it's saying there was basal delivery was resumed. So you can see there, you may not be able to focus on it, you can see there's a period of SmartGuard which has kicked in after my lunch and then cancelled again. Now I got no, because I've set it, I got no audible alerts for either of those. But sometimes when you look at the face of the pump and you get that little red flashing light and you can check, what you don't want is then to discover that SmartGuard has been active and has actually pushed your levels up and out of range, and by the time it cancelled you were already slightly too high. But it's a balance really of whether or not you have those alerts on, and too many alerts on could result in alarm fatigue. So it would be that sort of thing where if I could reset that 2.2 limit, that would give me another alternative. But in the meantime, I could choose those moments where I'm alerted as SmartGuard starts, and then at least I know to watch for it. I suspect some of those overshoots are basal related rather than anything else. For me, when my basal insulin isn't set right, everything else falls to pieces. And SmartGuard really is acting as a sort of a correction. It's a negative correction. It's removing insulin from my pump delivery to just try and massage the figures a little bit. So it's acting like a correction. Now if it's basing that correction on its calculations of 1.1 and the 2.2 when it starts again, on my basal profile being right, if my basal profile is slightly out, if my basal profile at that stage is just a little bit under what I actually need to keep me steady, then the 2.2 limit could end up with me being slightly higher than I would like to be. It's again, they're very, very tiny margins, these. In the grand scheme of things, I wonder really whether it's worth pursuing this level of perfection, because you are going to drive yourself mad. But sometimes when you've got a system that sometimes takes you to mid-range and then sometimes take you to the top of your kind of ideal range, you're trying to work around those issues. And for me, a lot of that is probably likely to be basal. So if SmartGuard has been working well and bringing me mid-range for a while, and then suddenly all the SmartGuard interactions are taking me to the top of my range, or I'm getting lots and lots and lots of full 2 hours of SmartGuard and then it cancelling and letting me know, then I'll either suspect that my basal insulin is too low if I'm getting lots of high readings, or it's too high if SmartGuard is not able to keep up and I keep dropping into either low-level hypos, or it runs the full 2 hours and it still hasn't quite done enough. So maybe it's time to basal test when that's happening. One of the times at the very, very beginning of my time with the 640G that I recognised SmartGuard was struggling for me was after breakfast. I've got a bit of a history of problematic readings around breakfast time, and you may have heard of dawn phenomenon, which is the body's kind of natural cycle of hormones which fires up the burners, usually sometime in the early hours, perhaps 4 or 5 in the morning, to get the body ready for the day. Now if you've got a healthy pancreas, that's no bother, but if you're pretending to be your own, then that surge of hormones and that release of glucose from the liver can give you an unexpected rise overnight. Now with a pump, of course, you can change your basal profile to kick in slightly extra at that early hour point if it's regular enough, and you can sort of work around that. But my problem is that really it only kicks off once I've already got out of bed. And if I push too hard with my basal profile to make sure I'm ready for that, if I sleep in by an extra half an hour, then my levels can be too low on rising. So usually what I do is I have an extra boost of basal at the point at which I usually get out of bed. But what that can mean, of course, because basal takes about an hour maybe to get going, is that that's a little late arriving. So I tend to have to massage my breakfast dose, to some extent my lunch dose as well, but breakfast is a particular case in point, by pre-bolusing. So that's when you'll give your bolus dose for your meal, and then you'll give it a really good amount of time for the insulin to start working. For me it can be half an hour or 45 minutes for a rapid acting insulin that's supposed to begin working within perhaps 15 or 20. But giving that pre-bolus really helps me to offset the rapid rise of blood glucose, not only from the food I've eaten, but also, of course, from the hormones that are kicking off at the same time, helpfully. So it's a technique I've used a lot, but SmartGuard, of course, if I begin to dip, SmartGuard can then kick in and is effectively subtracting insulin that I'm desperately trying to get active and get ready for the rise that I'm expecting. SmartGuard doesn't know that rise is coming, so it's not working out. It's only working on the history of the trend that it's seeing, that I'm dipping down and trying to offset below my low limit. But actually, I know that my breakfast is going to kick in soon, and I'm going to need that insulin up and running and ready to go. So breakfast was a particular case in point. Let's have a look at an example, and you'll see what I mean.
So this is some slightly strange behaviour I've just seen on the 640G. I had a SmartGuard that kicked in after breakfast, after I'd had my breakfast dose. I try to avoid a SmartGuard whenever I'm pre-bolusing. It doesn't seem to cope very well with that. If I just go into the history, no, not history, notifications, sorry. If I go into notifications, you can see that I had a suspend before low at 20 to 10 and then an alert before high at 10 o'clock. But I didn't notice either of those because I've got the alarms turned off. But looking at the 3-hour trace, you can see there that that's the SmartGuard starting, and then at 10 o'clock, which is there, I had an alert before high, which ought to have cancelled the SmartGuard, but it didn't. And the only thing I can think of is sort of alert stacking, because I hadn't got an audible alert for the SmartGuard kicking in. There was a SmartGuard alert, which was then followed by a alert before high, but because I hadn't cleared the SmartGuard alert, it looks like the SmartGuard didn't shut off when it should have done, and so I've been rising, and now I'm 8 and double arrows up. So I've just given myself a small correction there to cover what SmartGuard cancelled in basal terms. Probably a bit more than that, because this doesn't look very happy for me. So yeah, I need to perhaps have a chat with the people at Medtronic about alert stacking and whether that's expected behaviour if you don't clear an alert, and just see what they say.
I did hear back from Medtronic about that SmartGuard not cancelling, and it was the 30 minutes. It was just a few moments outside of that 30 minutes, and there was a packet of data that needed to be sent from sensor to pump that would have, I think it was an extra 3 or 4 minutes, would have cancelled SmartGuard in that instance. As for the uncleared alert, they are looking into that. It doesn't seem to be an issue with the pump itself, but that's the great thing about Medtronic pumps. There's always that technical team that you can draw, and if you've got any of these questions, if it behaves in a way that you're not expecting, you can just contact them and ask, and they come back to you pretty quickly with what happened, particularly if you can uplink your CareLink data, because then they can have a look at what's happened on the pump and explain what was going on in that particular circumstance. So I know that uncleared alerts don't always stop alarms sounding, because my SmartGuard runs without alerts most of the time, and yet I do get audible alerts during that time. So I can't really explain that, but it's not something I'm going to worry about massively. And again, this is one of those times where the flexibility of the setup around SmartGuard really helps. You can, for any time slot, if it's something that's happening regularly, like my breakfast doses, I can either deactivate SmartGuard entirely for that period, so it won't kick in at that point, or I can set it to alert me if it does kick in, if it's a time when I might or might not want it to. And so the system is still available for the times when I really need it, but I can either deactivate it or I can get the alert just to keep an eye on things at those times when there is a potential for SmartGuard to be rather too active and for me to end up spiking high after a meal because it's already stopped the insulin beforehand. And the fact that you can set that profile and adjust it on a sort of almost hour-by-hour basis, you can have, I think it's eight periods in the day where you can adjust either which alarms you get or whether or not SmartGuard is active at all.
So here are the low settings. That's where SmartGuard is set up. And if we go into setup, you can see that actually I've set up 3 different profiles for SmartGuard during the day. You can set up to 8, in fact. You can divide the day into 8 chunks. And each of those can have different alerts and even different levels for your low limit if you want to do that. So I've got one that runs overnight, one that runs around breakfast time, and one that runs for the rest of the day. So the big one, the one that runs for the rest of for the main bit of the day. Let's have a look at that. So this is where you set your low limit, and that could go up and down as you wanted to adjust it if you found you were getting readings that you weren't keen on. And then underneath that arrow there, that's where you get to tailor the alarms. So suspend before low, that is the SmartGuard function, and that's currently on. But I've not got an alert there before low. So SmartGuard will turn on, but it won't buzz and alert me to let me know. And also further down here, we've got the resume basal alert. That's also turned off, which means mostly that SmartGuard is just doing its thing, and I'm getting on with my day, and then I only find out about it when it's already dodged a hypo for me. Suspend on low there, that's more similar to the low glucose suspend on the Veo. So if you wanted to and didn't like SmartGuard, you could actually run it very like a Veo, and it would only suspend when you hit your low limit. And as I say, you can alter this on a time block basis, so you can have different behaviours or different alerts active throughout the 24 hours to really customise it and suit you.
If you found that SmartGuard didn't work for you, but you loved it overnight, you could just set that. You could have it working when you want it and turn it off when you don't. And that's really, really a powerful feature. Most of us living with type 1 for any length of time discover that we have a food nemesis. We have something that, despite our best efforts, is really, really tricky to tame. I don't know what yours is. Maybe it's one of these, a little pizza, perhaps. Here's another likely candidate. How about some pasta? Maybe it's Chinese or Indian takeaway. Perhaps it's this, my own personal favourite, the everlasting afternoon buffet. Fantastic. All those little bits of carbohydrate dripped in over a long period of time. Some of those are tricky because there's a heady combination of a large amount of carbohydrate involved and also quite a large amount of fat. And the fat will slow down the carbohydrate and it'll extend the absorption of the meal over a much longer period than you're used to. Sometimes it's just the time it takes you to eat the meal itself, like the all-afternoon buffet or pick and mix party food. It's not only is it hard to calculate, but it's dripping in over a really long period, and so it actually becomes quite difficult to manage. If you're on injections, you can split your dose. You can have a sequence of smaller doses spread over a long time to try and offset that long absorption curve. If you're on a pump, like the MiniMed 640G, of course you have the fancy bolus options. Either a square wave, which just extends the delivery of the bolus over a much longer time, or a dual wave, where you have a chunk up front and then you stretch the remainder over a long period. And those can be really, really useful in terms of balancing those unpredictable meals. You have to work quite hard at getting yourself a sort of general idea of how your body works with those foods. For example, I have absolutely no bother with pasta at all. I have to go all up front, but I know some people for whom pasta is a particularly difficult meal and they have to stretch their bolus over hours and hours and hours so as not to dip low. Now with SmartGuard, very helpfully watching what's going on after those tricky meals, you do get a little bit of protection against those dips, because there are times when you've perhaps given a little bit too much up front, and you begin to dip down and you would risk going low before the meal has finally arrived. But what you have to be careful about is that when SmartGuard stops your background insulin in order to offset that drop, it also stops any ongoing bolus insulin. And if you're not aware, it can perhaps stop too much insulin, and by the time you've spotted that SmartGuard has kicked in, then your insulin is now getting a bit late. Sometimes, again, it's one of those times where if you knew it was a wedding party or something, perhaps you would change your alarms. You might switch it so that you would get an audible alarm or a buzz alarm when SmartGuard kicked in, just so that you could keep an eye on it. Usefully, if SmartGuard does stop a bolus being delivered, one of those extended boluses or dual wave boluses, to prevent you from dipping low, in the notification screen it tells you what was delivered of that extended portion. and what was left to go. So that once SmartGuard has done its thing and you're back up and out of danger level again, then you can top up the insulin. You can either square wave over your expected period, the remaining insulin which SmartGuard stopped, or you can choose to put it all in up front if SmartGuard has kicked in and actually the insulin is now a little bit late. Or you could even do a dual wave, a sort of balance in between. So extended boluses are one you do have to be a little bit aware of with SmartGuard, just so that what you're expecting to happen in terms of insulin delivery is actually what happens. In my experience, they're not particularly frequent, those things, but if you're somebody who uses square waves and dual waves a lot, then as far as SmartGuard is concerned, you might want to consider a slightly different alert or alarm setup around that period. If you use SmartGuard, if you use dual waves or square waves all the time for your evening meals, for whatever reason, gastroparesis or something like that, then to have an audible alert when it was happening would be really useful, so that SmartGuard could still do its thing and could stop you dipping low, but that you would be made aware of the situation. Again, it's that balance of too many alerts wearing you down and making you a bit frustrated, and the beauty of SmartGuard being that it just helps you out with without you having to bother about it, or without it letting you know. But on the flip side, there are just some occasions when knowing gives you extra information, and then you can react to that knowledge and you can keep a closer eye on things. Alternatively, I could set my low limit to be lower at that point during that period when I'm using those extended waves, even if just temporarily for that one meal. I could go into the settings. It's very easy to change, very quick, and I could reduce the low limit so that SmartGuard would still be watching for any really proper crashes down into low levels, but it wouldn't necessarily shut off if I was still 5.5 or whatever and was very gently going down. So there you go, there's just a few situations where I found SmartGuard needed a little bit of fine-tuning to work well for me. The beauty of the flexibility of the setup is that there are lots of ways I can work around those challenging situations. That's it for now. Next time will be probably my last of these video diaries, and that'll be a bit of a roundup of my whole experience, what I've loved about the pump, and what I've found drives me nuts. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.